Hello and welcome back to Marineford TCG. My name's Joe, the drink of the day is a cold can of Red Bull, and today it's time to make an OP11 tier list. Now that the starter deck cards are on the public version of the sim, I had a bit more chance to sort of see some data on what these matchups are looking like, and give them a go myself. And I think I've now got enough knowledge to put together at least a preliminary tier list. Of course, this is likely to change as the meta develops. Decks will rise, decks will fall. I'm sure some rogue decks will come out of nowhere and surprise everyone, like we've seen in past formats. But this is going to be at least a decent starting point. So in terms of tiers, top tier is decks that are going to top. They're going to fairly reliably top. You might not see them at every event, but if you don't see them for a while, you'd be a little bit confused. Great decks, I think, are decks that are going to top inconsistently. You'll see them top at some regionals. You won't see them top at others. It won't be a great surprise when they're there, but it won't be a great surprise when they're not. Good decks are sort of your off-meta or rogue decks that can absolutely top a regionals, but they're not going to do so reliably. These are strong leaders with good effects. They may have some rough meta matchups, or just not be as strong as some of the top picks. Locals decks, I think, are decks that have a little bit of sauce, but you're better off just taking them to your locals, where people are playing more off-meta picks or may not be as experienced. At regionals, I don't think these decks will succeed very well. And the binder. These are the decks that are going to best off sticking in your binder. These decks have not been buffed in a minute, and there's very little reason to play these, in my opinion, other than this is my favourite deck, so I will play it. I've also got Sakazuki and Law in here because they're banned, and they can stay in your binder. This binder tier is not ordered. I have no experience with most of these decks, so I've just chucked them all in here. The other tiers I will order as we go along. So let's start with the Gum Gum Giant in the room. The new blue-purple Luffy leader, here he is. This guy, I think, is very likely to be the best deck in the game. We saw this as the best deck in the game in Japan, and whilst towards the end of the Japanese format, decks like Bello Betty and Zoro did rise in popularity to counter this, and towards the end, you could argue by the numbers it wasn't necessarily the best deck in the game. But it's still the most warping in the meta. It's going to be incredibly dominant at the start of the format over here, I would imagine. And the only real change we've had is those starter decks. For what it's worth, I think the leaders buffed by the starter decks do have inherently better matchups into blue-purple Luffy. A lot of them focus around making your leader bigger. The Shanks, the Bonnie, and the purple-black Luffy, which gives blue-purple Luffy a tougher time attacking into them. Also, Buggy being able to reliably use the 10-cost Buggy to develop a 10-12 whilst removing a thing is very powerful into blue-purple Luffy. However, I think he's still going to be top tier. Will he be the best deck in the game? I think likely, but not guaranteed. The other Gum Gum Giant decks, let's put them all up here. Green-purple Luffy, much more lower to the ground. Damn blue-purple Luffy has a very close matchup, I would say, with the blue-purple Luffy. Didn't gain much from the starter decks. I think unlikely to be using the Beer Luffy. Don -4 every turn, pretty steep cost. But no doubt going to be good enough to make it into the top tier. We've seen how good this guy was in Japan. Purple Luffy as well, I think is a little bit weaker than these two, but he's just Mr. Consistent. It's a purple deck that always ramps. What more can you ask for? The new curve, with being able to play out the purple Katakuri on like your third turn going first, is nuts into a bunch of decks. Not just these top decks, but a lot of rogue decks just can't answer that. Which, I mean, it's a tough ask to answer that. I really like this deck. I think he's a lot of fun, and he's a bit more simple to play than these two. So if you're a newer player, but you want to play one of these Gum Gum Giant decks, I think Purple Luffy could be a really good place to start. The one that I'm least confident in is Purple Black Luffy, but I am going to put him in top. My early testing says that being a 7k leader is good. Who knew? That Beer Luffy is game-changing for this deck. Buffing your leader to 7k like constantly because he's quite hard to remove, being a 7 cost, gives you a lot better game into blue-purple Luffy than you had before. Didn't gain much else. A lot of those starter deck cards were not amazing. The Robin is nice for your consistency in seeing a ramp. And I think this deck will be a lot harder to build because there's so many different options you can take this. You can take it more of a removal build. You can take it more of a hand scam build with cards like Isho and the 4-cost Law. Or you can just take it in a more aggressive build with the Beer Luffy into a 7-cost Sanji into a 9-cost Luffy. There's a lot of different ways that I think people are going to build this. I think it will take time, potentially, for this to start topping. But when it does, I would not be surprised to see this consistently in the tops. The last two Gum Gum Giant decks, I'm going to put Robin in locals. The 6-cost Luffy, I think, is a cool buff, but doing Dom -2 every turn is not something Robin can keep up with. So, unfortunately, I think she can stay down there. Although, I will give her the small nod that Banish on a leader is just inherently good. And where is he? Where's Red Purple Luffy? Here he is. I'm going to put this guy in Great. I don't think he's as strong as these four, but we've seen players like Saichu in the EU tearing up onlines with this guy. So I think putting him any lower than Great would be a disservice. This guy didn't really gain anything from the new decks. You're not really playing the Beer Luffy, because it only gives a 1k buff. You may as well play 7-cost Kid at that point. But the new age builds of the Red Purple Luffy, where you're much more aggressive with cards like 3-cost Sanji and the 6-cost Rush Luffy from EBO2, are very cool. I think this deck could easily top. I just don't think it's going to be doing it as consistently as these four. Let's talk about the rest of the decks that got buffed by starters. I'm going to put Buggy in tier 1. Where in tier 1 are we going to put him? I think I'm going to put him here. Sorry, in top. I think I'm going to put him here just because I think this deck, this Purple Black Luffy, is going to take time. Buggy's buffs, you have blanket anti-removal in the Crockhawk, which is incredible. Your Lucci matchup went from losing to like borderline you can't lose, which is nuts. You're much more consistent at getting a big board to get to that 10-cost Buggy. Previously, that 10-cost Buggy kind of felt like a high roll. When you got it off, you were like, yo, I got it off this game. Now, that's consistent. You're getting that 10-cost Buggy off at least once or twice per game, so long as nothing's gone horrifically wrong. Having access to the 7-cost Buggy as well, to just shut down aggro decks like Zoro and Betty, is inherently very strong in this format. We saw how good those were at the end of the Japanese format especially. And turning off sort of half or more of their deck is crazy. You've also just got much better 2Ks. The 2Ks, they're blockers. It's great. 2Ks that are blockers. We've seen that time and time again now. Very, very powerful. Buggy overall has just got better on every front. And into the removal decks is miles better. I do really see this being a contender. I'm hesitant to put it higher because it's untested. But I do think this is a very, very strong deck. It's no joke anymore. Shanks, I think Shanks is still good. And it pains me to put him here because I love Shanks. If you know me, you know I love Shanks. But, man, those new cards were not as good as I was hoping for before they were revealed. And, yeah, they're just not very exciting. Becoming a 7k leader is fine. But in a world where Blue Purple Luffy just plays 2 9-costs to turn early, it's not doing very much. You've still got inherently good cards. And in some of the aggro decks, cards like Lucky Roo are incredible. But I don't think it's enough for me to put him anywhere above good, I'm afraid. Yamato. I think Yamato is also going in good. I think this deck has a bit of sauce now. Pretty much all of the new cards from the starter deck were solid additions. My main problems with Yamato are in how sort of easily your opponent can counter it. Cards like 7-cost Buggy turning off a good amount of your deck, and removal in general you're quite weak to, which I don't think Black's going to be very popular at the minute. But I do think that blue removal, things like Gravity Blow, Raging Tiger, and Red Rock, both going to be quite good into the Yamato. Also, whilst you do have more ways to deal with blockers now, blockers are still a bit of a problem. And also in some of the other aggro decks, sometimes you just get out aggroed by decks like Bello Betty and Red Zoro. I think Yamato has a bit of sauce, and if you get a good pilot, this could definitely top. I just would be quite surprised when it does. Pleasantly so. I've been enjoying this deck a lot more than I used to, but still, I think a good rating is pretty fair for Yamato. Let's talk about Blackbeard. I think Blackbeard is going to be in top tier, but I think I'm going to put it fairly low in top tier. You've got a good matchup into Blue Purple Luffy, especially with that new 7-cost Teach. Comboing like Van Augers with the Teach to remove their 1 guy a turn that you allow them to play is very, very nice. And that 6-cost Kuzan blocker is great for your aggro matchups. He can block a swing, then bring in something like a Burgess to have some pressure on the retaliation. However, from my early testing, Buggy feels horrific, and those aggro matchups still don't feel good. So I think Teach's a bit of a meta call. If you're expecting a lot of these like blue-purple Luffy decks, or purple Luffy decks, that aren't playing that many characters and you can use your removal pieces to get rid of them, Teach could be a pretty decent call. But if you get like a bunch of Zoros and Bettys on the day, you'll be pretty upset. The last leader from the new decks is Bonnie. I think Bonnie's going to be a great deck this format. Bonnie is always, like, up there. She's always fairly consistent at topping. It's just not at every event. One of Bonnie's worst matchups was always Lucci. And spoilers, I think Lucci's actually going to be significantly weaker this format. You're already kind of struggling in Japan with having to play that Tenzan build, where your deck was sort of less consistent and powerful in the early game, but really good late on once you slam that Tenzan, and you can just remove everything. I think Buggy in particular becoming a meta threat is going to really punish Lucci. You already had a horrific matchup into Blackbeard. With that Croc-Hawk with the blanket anti-removal, I think Buggy is also going to be a horrific matchup for Lucci. So I think that inherently makes Bonnie stronger. Being able to rest dudes to get out of aggression was always good into aggressive decks. And now with access to that second Searcher and slightly better 2Ks, as well as potentially the Law and Beppo, I think I would be surprised if we don't see Bonnie top somewhat consistently. This is the best deck at abusing 8-cost Kid, in my opinion. And 8-cost Kid, it's never going to be bad. So whilst we're talking about Bonnie, let's talk about the real deck that got buffed by that starter deck. Where is he? GY Law. I think GY Law could be about here. Yeah, GY Law, you have a tough time into Blackbeard because you're very reliant on plays. However, this deck had some sauce towards the end of the Japanese format, and that 2-cost Kid and Killer, it might not seem flashy, but it's a game changer. It's another card for you to increase your hand advantage and bounce with your leader effect, your 5-cost OP11 blocker laws effect to continue to get value. And it's very important just that it's a 2-cost. It lets you play it on 2, use the Bonnie blocker on 4, and use your leader effect to summon a 5-cost as soon as you're forward on turn, which is kind of nuts. This deck's really cool because it has great offense, but also has pretty decent defense in that 7-cost law that can heal you continuously, and the amount of card advantage you generate. It can be a little tough sometimes into some of the very, very aggressive decks, like Bello Betty. But into a lot of these purple decks, you're very strong. Also, you've got Hody. Can never forget Hody. You can rest their dons and go for game out of nowhere. RG Law was also buffed by the starter decks. I'm not going to lie, I don't play RG Law. I've not played into any RG Laws. I've seen nobody playing it on ladder. It should inherently just be a good deck, though, because it's another aggro deck, right? It's hard for aggro to be bad in this format. But RG Law is just one of those decks that you need to invest so much time into it to get good enough with the deck that I don't really feel qualified to rank this one. You really need an RG Law specialist. I think if you're like the best RG Law player in the world, this could be a top deck. But for an average RG Law player, I think this is just going to be good because you're never going to get max value. However, that 2-cost Kid and Killer is also really interesting for this deck. Let's finish off the aggro decks now. I've got Bello Betty. I think Bello Betty is a safe put in the top tier. Whereabouts, though? I think maybe around here. Not 100% on the ordering of this tier. It's sort of just going to depend what the meta share of these decks is. Because Bello Betty, very good into blue-purple Luffy. Very good into green-purple Luffy. Very bad into Buggy with that promo Buggy. And also some of the more defensive decks, things like Bonnie, can be tricky. We saw in the Japanese format how quickly this deck rose as the premier answer to blue-purple. And also into green-purple, this leader has some sauce. We saw, there was a funny game in one of the CSs where the green-purple Luffy player had to use Gum Gum Giant on like 5 Don to not die into the petty player, which was crazy. This deck's just so explosive. It's going to be a very, very strong pick in this meta. Just sort of depends how prevalent Buggy is, I think, on how good this is. What other aggro decks have we got here? Red-Green Luffy, I think this is just a bad version of RG Law. Should still be strong, has a bit of sauce, has some interesting combos with things like the Gum Gum Giant pistol. But I think I'm happy just putting this in locals. Zoro, I think I'm going to put Zoro above Bello Betty personally. Am I going to put him above Purple Luffy? I'm not sure I am. I think Zoro is arguably somewhat weaker to Buggy. However, you can tech more 5 costs and higher in to have a better game into the Buggy. Zoro is just sort of a less all-in aggro, but the aggression with the chopper build, summoning a million guys, is still very, very scary. It makes it hard for Blue-Purple Luffy to deal with much of anything when you've just got 5 guys on your board from very early on. And having access to that counter event gives you a lot of defense in the first couple of turns. Because even if you don't have it, if you just leave a Don open, your opponent might just not swing into you, which is going to buy you resources for that later game. Also, having better access to just rush cards, you're much more likely to be playing cards like Kid and Killer and the Rush Zoro. But Betty really only has the Rush Inazuma that they play, as well as the Dragon, which means that even if your opponent has controlled your board, you can sometimes steal wins with Rush. RG Odin, I think, is a locals deck. I'll put him at the top of locals. He got that new Yamato out of EBO2. It was fine. It was fun. Very, very fun. I loved this deck. And being a 6k leader does have its benefits. But I think with the rise of more powerful foes and gaining nothing from the starter decks, I think this guy in locals tier is fine. What other aggro decks have we got? Whitebeards, you can go at the bottom of locals. I don't play Whitebeard. He's a 6k leader, so he should inherently be quite good. So maybe we'll put him here. Yeah, he's a 6k leader with a lot of resources. I think he is going to sort of fall foul of a lot of the other aggro that's rising to beat this guy. Things like Bello Betty should be pretty horrific. But just being a big guy with lots of resources and lots of aggro, I think it's enough to at least put him on the tier list. Arlong's an interesting one. I might put him at the bottom of good. Arlong's curve, where you get like the something on 3 with leader effect into the 3-cost Arlong and the 4-cost Arlong on 5, is like insane. That curve is ridiculous because you stun the opponent's character they played on 4. You stun their leader. They can't interact with your board at all for a whole turn. That next turn is very good. However, he is a little bit inconsistent at pulling that off, obviously. And he's quite weak to some of the even more aggressive decks again. And then if you can't get to the late game, it becomes quite tricky. Arlong's problem is that he just gets starved, really. People just don't attack your life because they know everything is a trigger. So they're just going to play board super hard. And you don't really have much late game outside of exactly Hody. And Hody's cool, but he's not everything. Katakuri. Honestly, this deck kind of sucks. Like, Tenmum's fine, but if you're playing Tenmum, you can't even attack this guy. So he's not losing any cards. He can just like red rock your Tenmum and just swing a bit. And he's getting to his top end significantly faster than you. So that should be pretty tough. And into the other aggro decks, you're just a slower, aggressive deck. Like, this deck kind of fell off, honestly. He was pretty good back in the day, but I don't think there's much reason to play Katakuri anymore. The yellow one. Other aggressive decks. Dragon, yeah, you can go with locals. Dragon's alright. You get the same sort of Rev Army package as Betty, but you don't get to buff everything by 3,000 power for no reason. So he's a lot worse, but you still get to play Karasu. You still get to play Vankov. It's still a good leader. For your locals, I just wouldn't take Dragon to a regionals. Chopper as well, he's probably... I'll put him at the top of locals. Chopper's just kind of like a worse version of Zoro. You've got a couple of exclusive cards that are really powerful, but you have so much less like staying power than Zoro because you have that one less life. You don't gain that much by being green. Hody Jones is nice, but that's about it. And because you have that 4 life as opposed to 5, it makes you weaker into other aggro decks. I think Choppers should still have a good matchup into some of these other sort of slower decks like blue, purple, and even maybe purple Luffy. But into decks like Zoro and Betty, I don't know if I would favour Chopper. Maybe over Betty, but I think Zoro will beat Chopper every time. Buggy is going to give Chopper the same problems that he gives to Zoro and Betty. And just generally, this leader effect is slightly worse than Zoro's. Starlight 21 Luffy, I don't have much to say about this leader. It's fine. It's another red aggressive deck. I'll put it in locals because I think all these decent red aggressive decks are worthy of the tier. But I wouldn't bother playing this. I don't think it's that interesting either. You're better off just playing Zoro. Like, significantly so. Let's talk about the rest of the OP11 leaders. And I'm going to start off with what I think is the weakest of them. I'm going to start off with Jinbei. I'm going to put Jinbei in good. I think you could play Jinbei at regionals. If one tops, I would be surprised. Like, don't get me wrong. I don't think this is that great. But I think he has a bit of sauce. The Fishman package, being able to sort of aggressively rest your opponent's dudes and remove them, is very nice into aggro decks. Your cards like the 5-cost Fisher Tiger and the 6-cost Jinbei really just sort of come in and start removing their stuff immediately, giving you a bit of game there. Blue-purple Luffy, though, that matchup's tough. That matchup is tough. The fact that they can remove your 6-Cross Jinbei with Big Mom is probably the thing that flips this matchup the most. If they couldn't do that, I think this would be a lot more interesting. Because obviously you've got access to Hody Jones. Searchable Hody Jones, no doubt. Which is obviously very good into these purple decks. But I think Jinbei just needs a couple more cards to make him rise up a little bit higher on this tier list. Shirahoshi as well, I'd put her in the same place. I might even put her below Jinbei, actually, because she is quite vulnerable to getting starved. Your opponent can just not attack you, and you don't play that many life takers other than Hody Jones. Sometimes you just don't see your Seeking combos, or your opponent is just able to get there. Blue-purple Luffy especially. Of course, Hody's very good, but if they can just spam Sanji Linlins, you don't really have game into that. It's just kind of too much. Once we get that new OP12 Shirahoshi, I think she could be a lot better. Maybe in Great Tier? Maybe I'm coping. This is one of my favourite leaders out of the new set, if not my favourite. But I think it's disingenuous to put her anywhere above good. I don't think I would see this even semi-consistently topping. Like, you'd be quite surprised if this topped. And that's what this tier is. It's the tier where, oh, that topped. That's cool. Kobe, I think I'll put slightly above these leaders. The baked-in anti-removal is really good, and his package is strong. He's just missing a couple of things. When we get that Kobe promo, I could see this rising up maybe a little bit higher in good. And into aggro, this deck like stomps aggro, because you can just attack all their active dudes. It's kind of nuts. The Helmeppo, Hibari, and Kobe are all incredibly strong, but just the blue-purple Luffy matchup. That matchup is bad, like quite bad. You just don't have the game for their endgame. The endgame is ridiculously strong. You don't have ways to rest Don. And really purely because of that and how dominant I think he's going to be, I can't put him higher than good. But a fun note is you're really quite good into Teach because they can't remove anything, and your run plays are not that important. Purple Katakuri, I think I'll put at the top of good. This deck is good. Clues in the name. But you don't get to play Gum Gum Giant, and that's the deck's biggest problem for me, is it's a purple deck that doesn't get to play Gum Gum Giant. And for me, that just sort of rules it out of these two. The 5-cost Perospero and getting to summon the 8-cost Katakuri for 2 are really good. But the games where you don't see the Perospero or don't see a Kata combo feel very, very tough. It's also going to be a really hard deck to get maximum value out of, because you need to track everything that your opponent's going to draw, which is going to require a fairly big brain. I don't think this deck has inherently horrible matchups into much, other than Lucci and maybe Betty, but it doesn't have great matchups into anything either. I think it's just going to be slightly losing across the board into most of the top decks. You're just not doing anything really unfair, and so many of these decks are doing unfair things at the minute that I don't think Katakuri is going to top very much. Nami, however, I think is going to go in great. I'm going to put it at the top of great. We saw this do well towards the end of the Japanese format. Unfortunately, we don't have Oden, where I think this could rank a bit higher. And in fact, this might be below Bonnie, but I'm going to leave her in front of Bonnie. The sort of burn style is really good, and becoming a 7k leader is great into some aggressive decks like Zoro and Green Purple. It's not so great into Betty, because everything that they play is 8, and Karasu makes you down to 6. Which is still pretty rough. But the bouncing with Nojiko, the access to Raging Tiger and Pudding, and the life burn with 8-cost Kid gives you just generically strong power across the board. You draw extra cards, you're a 7k leader on defense for 1 card. I can't put Nami any lower than great. Next, I want to talk about Lucci. Lucci, I'm just going to put in good. I know Lucci always finds a way, and maybe he'll find a way in this meta, but your blue-purple Luffy matchup was already kind of dodgy. You were really relying on that Tenzan build and then not seeing Red Rock. I think the Buggy matchup is going to be horrific, and for sort of those reasons, as well as Teach obviously being very bad, I think this might finally be Lucci's time to fall out of the meta. We'll see, maybe I'm wrong. The Lucci cookers, man. They've been working overtime. He's survived the ban of Eni's Lobby, the ban of Moria, the ban of Ice Age. This guy's been hit more than like any other leader. It's crazy. But for me, I've been seeing less and less Lucci now. Just because some of these matchups now are very, very bad. He doesn't just have Teach. He's got the Buggy. And if you build your deck to heavily counter the blue-purple Luffy with the Tenzans, it makes you sometimes a bit weaker into these sort of low-to-the-ground aggro decks, which can also be tricky. Even GY Law now has protection in the beige. You've got to remove the beige first. I'm not seeing it for Lucci, but we'll see. And we'll talk about the rest of these in order. Black Smoker, it's just bad Lucci. If I'm putting Lucci at the top of good, I guess I'll put Smoker somewhere else in good. I think probably around here. It's just bad Lucci. There's not really much to say. I love Smoker, but yeah, if you want to play a black removal deck, just play Lucci. Blue Nami is a meta call. I'm going to put her in great. If you match into a bunch of blue-purple Luffys, a bunch of like Bonnies that aren't playing 9-cost Zoro, you're going to have a ball. But if you match into like Red Zoro, Willow Betty, GY Law, you're going to have a very tough time. Those decks are very aggressive, and there's a lot of aggro. So that's a lot of different decks to dodge. But you never know. Blue Nami players, they find a way. This will top at least one event. I would be very surprised if it doesn't. I just don't think anywhere near consistently. These decks are just getting very aggressive at the minute. To counter this, and Blue Nami just kind of gets caught up in the crossfire. Rebecca, this is a locals deck, if ever I've seen one. This is a cross AI, YouTube bait type deck. If you're like a Giga Brain, like cross AI, you can make this top original. No one else is going to, though, realistically. And with how much the power has crept in this set, it may well be a step too far for Rebecca, even in the strongest of hands. So I think locals is fine. Roscinante, this is only going at the bottom of locals because I know there are quite a lot of copers that really like this deck. I've played into this with a good few different leaders now. I've not lost. I've not even got close to losing. I don't really understand this deck and why people like it. Like, you have some cool interactions with like the 2-cost Sugar, but that's kind of it. I think this leader is quite bad, and honestly, I'd probably put this in my binder tier, but I know a lot of people like this leader. If you're a Rosie super fan, and you know there's something that I clearly don't, let me know in the comments. Enel, I'll put at the bottom of great. There will be Enels at top. He's very good into aggro. Things like Zoro, Beloetti. You've got all the low-cost removal, things like Godatsu, Egghead Nami, 9-cost Yamato, very good at that. It's just some of the top-end decks where you really struggle. And I wonder if how we'll see Enel decks sort of evolve to counter the blue-purple Luffy. But we did see Enel top a couple of times in Japan. So I think off the back of that alone, you can't put Enel any lower than great. I don't know how the new starter decks are going to affect him. More Teach is probably quite bad for Enel. But that new 10-cost Enel from EBO2, that card's no joke. That card's very, very powerful. It finally gives him a bit of game into Teach. But I do think personally that some of these decks are just going to be a little bit difficult for him to deal with. Green-purple Luffy's able to be very aggressive. Blue-purple Luffy has ridiculous endgame. And of course, Teach just turns off his leader effects, that's tough. Red-purple Uta, this is a locals deck. I don't really know. I'll put her in here. She's only getting mentioned because she did get buffed by the Shanks deck with that new 9-cost Shanks, and I suppose the Uta 2k as well. Don't think this is going to move the needle. This leader just doesn't have enough resources. The fact that you have to trash to ramp, and you're not really making use of minus 2000 power most of the time, is a little tough. It's like Luffy gets to draw a card and ramp. Uta has to trash a card, and the same with Robin. In fact, let's put them together. They're kind of the same leader, right? Uta's got some power down, Robin's got some banish. It's fine. It's just a locals deck. Reiju. Now, Reiju, there was no Blackbeard. That would be very good. Although I do think Blue-Purple Luffy is finally sort of an endgame deck that really punishes Reiju. Blackbeard matchup is obviously horrific because you don't get any of your effects. You don't get your draws. You don't get your rush. You don't get your judge. Blue-Purple Luffy has a ridiculous endgame and can just play a million guys. But one nice thing is that you do have the 8-cost judge who has the activate main and can rest a Don, which is very good into these purple decks. I think I'll probably put Reiju about here. I think she'll top more consistently than Red-Purple Luffy, purely because more people like playing Reiju. There's a lot of Reiju fans, and we did get that new Vinsmoke stuff in the new set. The blue Ichiji, you got the blue Reiju for your consistency. That's a serious consistency buff. You've also got some of the other options, but mainly the Ichiji and the Reiju, I think, are the most interesting ones. So I think Reiju, we will see some Reiju tops, just not every event. Moria, man, I love Moria. I'm going to put him next to Smoker. They're kind of two sides of the same coin. Smoker has more removal, Moria has more board flood. This guy needs a buff. Bandai, print some more Thriller Bark characters, please. I'm really hoping in set 13 we get a bit of support for this. But I think the black lead is likely to be Emu. So maybe they'll all be world government type cards. We'll see. Boa. Boa's fine. It's a blue deck. Probably just worse than blue-yellow Nami at this point, because she draws cards more reliably. I don't really know where to place Boa. I'll probably put her about here. I think Boa and Shanks are just both kind of decks that were good and have now fell off a little bit. Boa having access to all the Warlord stuff is great. She did suffer a lot from the ban of Jinbei, though. Red Rock and Raging Tiger are still good in this format, but there's more like anti-removal now with things like Buggy and the 2-cost Bedge. So I'm not personally sold on Boa being a top deck, but I think any lower than good would be a disservice to how strong the leader inherently is. Foxy, this can be a locals deck. He's got a bit of sauce, and he's got his dedicated fan base, but a lot of people really don't like this leader. I think mostly because the character is incredibly obnoxious in the anime. But his leader effect is strong. It's just kind of a bit dated. He needs some more support. I'd love to see some more Foxy support. That'd be cool. Doflamingo, I think it would be pretty harsh to put him much lower than great. Even though he has done nothing in Japan, though. He's kind of done nothing in Japan, and he does just lose to Buggy, right? Maybe he does. Maybe he is bad. I'll put him with Boa. Yeah, this guy was everywhere through EBO2 and OP10 in Japan. And then in OP11, like, he was rogue by usage and win percentage. I don't think we saw this top a single CS in Japan. So by that metric, it's probably about here, because we didn't see any of these leaders top either. Yeah. The more I'm thinking about it, the more that I think this is a good position for Dofi. Didn't really gain anything from the new set. Maybe the 8-cost Luffy. Gained nothing from the starter decks and gained a horrific matchup in Buggy. Yeah, do you know what? I'm gonna leave Dofi here. You should be still pretty good in these aggro decks, but the blue-purple Luffy is just so good, and you're not really fast enough to deal with that consistently. And the green-purple Luffy matchup was also slightly losing. GY Law should be probably losing as well now, because their characters are outside the range of your 4-cost Law. And they have a lot of blockers and a lot of cards in hand that you can't really interact with. Bouncing cards back to their hand doesn't do anything. And they even have the Bedge to play around Raging Tiger. Yeah, I think here's fine for Dofi. It's still a good deck. The leader effect's inherently strong, but just kind of misses his Jinbei. I wonder if they unbanned that, how good he'd be. I think they could probably unban it now. I don't know. We'll see. Vegapunk. Vegapunk, I have very little experience with in this format. I've not played him. I've not played against him. I'm just going to copy what Abster TCG did on his tier list. Because he's the Vegapunk guy. If anyone's going to know, it's him. He put it in his likely good tier. So I'll just put him in the good tier. If you want thoughts about Vegapunk, check out Abster's video. Marco. Now, Marco is probably top of good, low of great. He actually won the last regional of EBO2, which was really cool to see. I think we'll put him in great. He didn't gain a lot from the new set, right? But he's inherently quite decent into aggro. And you've got better removal into the blue-purple Luffy than something like Shanks does. With that extra 2k power down, brings like Katakuri blockers down to 6k, which you can then remove with Rayleigh, which is really nice. The matchups that might be tricky is things like Buggy when they have just the blanket anti-removal. As well as GY Lord, that Bedge, if you can't deal with the Bedge efficiently, that can be quite tough. I'm not very experienced with Marco, but based off how he did in EBO2, and the fact that I don't think he's got much worse, I think we'll leave him in great for now. Maybe above Enel and below Nami. No, maybe below both. And while I'm thinking about it, Enel should probably be above Nami. Like, Enel did top in the East. Maybe Enel should be about here. Yeah, he did top in the East. These decks didn't. Lucci did, though. But he's lower because of the Buggy matchup. Yeah, I think I'm happy with that order for now. We'll revisit this at the end. Carrot, I've not tested Carrot. I'm going to put it at the bottom of good. I haven't played this deck with the new Lord Beppo. Really excited to. Need to do a video on that. Haven't had a chance to yet. Haven't played into any Carrots. I think it's broadly worse Bonnie, but it's got some significant buffs now with that Lord Beppo. Pudding, I think Pudding... Where are we going to put Pudding? I'm going to put in good. 10 Mum, very good into Blue Purple Luffy because you're ramped to it, unlike Katakuri. You've also got access to the 8-cat combo, which is really nice. You can summon either the yellow one or the purple one for 2 Don. The problem comes in that you hard lose to Aggro. Like, you have no game into Betty, you have no game into Zoro. Just kind of lose on reveal. So for that reason, I don't think you can put her above good. It's really just like a meta call, and the meta you're calling is really just Blue Purple Luffy. So I'm not sure I would ever play this. Maybe this is a little bit lower, actually. Yeah, we'll put her down here. Carrot's only at the bottom because I don't know. Calgara, I think he fell off. This is just a bad aggro deck now. He's fun, and in OP12 we're getting those new cards, but for now I'm just going to put him in locals. Lim's got to be at least good, right? Lim's got to be at least good. I never know where to place Lim. It's so hard to call. You think Lim's dead, and then it just, like, top 2's a regional. It's crazy. It top 2'd one this last weekend, right? In EBO 2. Or did it win? I don't know. This topped a regional very recently. It didn't do much in Japan, but you're reasonably okay into aggro with the 6-cost Sakazuki and the 5-cost Newgate. Although Bello Betty's aggro specifically is probably quite tough. They're just so fast. And Blue Purple Luffy having such an insane endgame if you can't kill them early is good. Holy Jones is green, but he doesn't really work in Lim because he comes in tapped. Yeah, I'll leave Lim in good. I think Lim is still a strong leader, but didn't really gain anything in this set. RG Smoker. He's got to be good, right? It's got to be good. It's a more... RG Smoker was already pretty good last set, and it's just got more consistent with the addition of the Kujaku Searcher. And there's also some new Navy cards that you can play. I think we'll put him in good. I'll put him with Marco. Both these sort of dual color red leaders. He's like an 8-cost Kid Abuser. Abuses Kid sort of to a similar level as Bonnie. Not as good defensively, but he uses Kid to protect his offensive pressure. And you can really sort of aggro your opponent out the game, especially with that Banished Smoker. When you see the curve, this deck was always very good. And now with that extra Searcher, you should see that curve more consistently. So I think great is reasonable. We will see Smoker top. I'm just not sure how consistent he'll be at doing so. Sugar is a locals deck. There's also a YouTube baits deck that I'll put with Rosie. You get to use a lot of cool events, and you get to play some pretty cool top end in the 10-cost Shanks, and you get to get there very fast if you're playing one of the more aggressive ramping builds. But I don't think this is going to be a serious competitor. However, she's better than I expected when she was first revealed, so I'll put her in locals tier. Usopp. Usopp fell off, man. This deck fell off. This deck gained nothing. It was already sort of fringe in EBO 2. And, like, you're a slow deck that is not going to beat Blue Purple Luffy. So I think for that reason, he goes at the bottom of good. It's still a strong leader effect. We'll put him here. Yeah, it's still a strong leader effect, and your aggro matchup should still be pretty good. Because you've got really good removal with the 4-cost Zoro, and you can attack into their characters straight away, which is obviously very strong. But the Blue-Purple Luffy, as well as even potentially the Green-Purple Luffy matchup, scare me. Also, Buggy just negating all of your removal is not great. It's really not great. So I think we'll leave Usopp here. If you've got an Usopp build that you've cooked up, let me know. But I don't see a lot of people talking about Usopp at the moment. Kid, I think, is significantly better than Katakuri because you get to make big blockers, which helps you into aggro. You've got the life burn, which is quite nice into Blue-Purple Luffy. Like you with your Hawkins and your 8-cost Kid. I think you're broadly better off just playing Blue-Yellow Nami. I might put Kid about sort of here. This RG Law placement feels weird because he could be very good, but only in the right hands. Yeah, I'll put Kid about here. He's got an inherently strong leader effect, got inherently good cards. Just didn't gain really anything this set, other than the beige blocker. But the beige is much more useful for GY Law because he was much more vulnerable to removal. I think the main thing that hurts this guy, honestly, is just the introduction of Blue-Yellow Nami. as kind of a better burn leader. But Nami can make use of the 8-cost kid, not as well inherently as the yellow kid leader can, but because you draw so many cards and you have so much more defense, I think this is just a significantly worse version of blue-yellow Nami now, which is a real shame. We are getting some new yellow supernovas in OP12, I believe, that I'm pretty excited to try out. There's a 5-cost Zoro that summons a guy on KO, which could be pretty cool. We'll see about Kid, but I think good for now is a fair rating. Uta, I love Uta. She always has potential. Uta always has potential. I'm invincible plus Hody Jones goes hard. But I think locals is as high as I can put Uta for now. She's just been power crept. She's gained no support in so long. Since that last wave of 6 starter decks, really. And even that didn't help her that much. I hope they buff Uta soon, because I love this deck, but I think locals is fair. Starter deck 13. I'm going to put Black Yellow Luffy in locals. I'll put him pretty high in locals as well. I've seen some people having some success with this, but I've not seen anyone convert it to a regional. If I've missed that top, let me know. But until I see a top at a regional, I don't think any higher than locals. The ban of Moria really hurt this deck. It was brutal. Red Yellow Sabo, it's another locals deck. It's probably right at the top of locals. You could even put this in the bottom of good, but you don't see this topping. However, there's a lot of Red Yellow Sabo fans, and he's definitely better than Binder tier. Didn't gain a ton in this set though, which was a little bit of a shame. Blue Yellow Ace, I'm going to put significantly lower. I'll put him about here with Robin. This leader needs help. He's been getting support, just none of it's very good. We need some Blue Yellow Ace support. I'm really hopeful for these set 13 when we're getting new 3 brothers leaders, because this leader's effect is so cool, just quite bad. And Black Luffy is the final deck. I think he's good. I'm going to put him. I'll put him with these other black leaders, but I think he is stronger than both Smoker and Moria. You've got access to that new GARP, which is cool, and you've got the Event Searcher. So you finally have a bit of reliable sort of trashing and Navy search. You get to lean much more heavily into this Navy build. And being a 6k leader, obviously inherently strong into both Aggro and Blue-Purple Luffy and Green-Purple Luffy. So I do think I would always play him over these. But he's not that much better, right? He's really not that much better. And you're still probably better off just playing Lucci. Unless you just really like this leader, which is fair. He's fun. So that's my tier list. Let's take a look. Does any of this look wildly off? You could maybe put Nami in top, but I think Great is fine. No, honestly, I think this is fine. I think I'm happy with this. Maybe Shirahoshi's a bit high. Oh, I'm leaving her there. I love Shirahoshi. This is a cope pick for sure. This should probably be it. But I'm leaving her here because I like her. It's a fun deck. Carrot could be higher, could be lower. I've not tested this deck. This is one deck I've got very little experience with. Pudding, you could top with this. You just match up roulette, like, to the extreme. Yeah, I think I'm pretty happy with this. Let me know where you disagree in the comments. If there's anything that you think is wildly wrong on this. If any of these binder leaders you think are secretly meta or have just made a mistake, let me know. Yeah, but with that said, I'm really excited to see how this meta develops. Maybe at the end we'll take a look at sort of what decks have topped and how good or bad this tier list prediction was. And maybe we can laugh at my mistakes. Either way, thank you for watching, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your day.